Hi and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm coming at you with a haul video. It will probably be the first video in a series of three haul videos. So I haven't done a haul video since like the spring of 2022, and since then I have been buying and reading books. So I think since then I've bought over 30 books. So that's why I'm choosing to split my haul into like 3 videos, because I don't think anyone should have to sit through me droning on about 30 plus books. So I think that this is a much better idea. And in this first video I want to show you and talk about the books that I have already read. Now some of these books I have talked about in previous videos, but not all of them. So if I have talked about them before, I will refer you back to those videos where I talk more at length about these books. But I think that this is a good way of doing it, because then I'm not repeating myself and I'm speeding up the process and keeping up the tempo in these haul videos. So the books that I will be mentioning in these haul videos are going to be pretty random, and there's not really one theme or genre or anything like that. So in this first video I will just go by the order of when I read the books. So next up are 2 books that sort of go together, and I mentioned these in my previous video, so if you want to hear a bit more about them, you can check that out. So these are Hear the Wind Sing and Pinball 1973 by Japanese author Haruki Murakami. Now I have read the English translations and they are done by Ted Goosen. And if you know about Murakami and have read him, you will recognize the tone and the style and the vibe of these books. They are very in keeping with his later books. The vibe is very strange and mysterious in a good way, in my opinion, because I really enjoy Murakami's writing style and his storytelling. But if you haven't read Murakami before, then perhaps there are better books to start with. But if you have read him and enjoy his style, then I highly recommend checking these books out as well. They were written in 1979 and 1980. So next up is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and I also mentioned this one in my previous video, so you can check that out. Now this is a classic and it really deserves to be. I read the English original and the writing is just superb and the story is very engaging. I have seen both movies before I read the book, and if you're someone who has seen the movies, I still recommend that you read the book. It's just amazing. So next up is book number 5 in the Millennium series, and this one in English is called The Girl Who Takes an Eye for an Eye and was written by David Lagercrantz. Now I have read the French translation, which was made by Hersch Roel-Rousson, and I mentioned this one in my previous video, and I mentioned that I didn't enjoy it at all. I'm someone who really enjoys thrillers, but this one just did nothing for me, so moving on. So next up is My Sister, My Love by Joyce Carol Oates, and I read the Swedish translation, which was made by Ulla Danielsson. And I mentioned in my previous video that I think it was a mistake to read the translated version instead of the English original. I don't think that it would have been my favorite book if I had read the English version instead, but I do think that I would have enjoyed the story a lot more, because not only is the translation bad, but it's downright annoying. So I am going to give Joyce Carol Oates another chance, but this time I'm making sure that I'm picking up the English original. So next up is A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn, and this is another book that I talked about in my previous video, and it's a mystery set in the 1880s in England, and that's something that should really appeal to me, which it did when I read the synopsis. But then in the end the story wasn't very well executed, so I didn't really enjoy it, which I feel is a big shame, because there's a whole series of books, but I'm just not tempted to continue. So on to another book that I talked about in my previous video, and that is Still Life by Louise Penny. Now this is a classic whodunit murder mystery So the police are basically trying to find out who in a village killed an old woman in the forest. This book was pretty meh for me. It wasn't badly written, but the story wasn't very exciting. It never really stood out to me, and I also had to learn too much about bows and arrows, and which I'm not very interested in, and still am not. But I do give it extra points for being set in Quebec, because I've never read a book set in Quebec before, so that was exciting. So on to another book that I talked about in my previous video, and that is Une affaire de cœur by Marie Collins. And this is another book that I got for free at the library, and I read inside that it's actually a book that someone got as a freebie with a magazine back in 1994. And if you take that into account, I really feel like this is a short and sweet little story about two lawyers on opposite sides of a case who fall in love. So next up is a book that I talked about a bit longer in my previous video, and it is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. And this is a modern controversial classic, but I do think that it is a well-written book, and it does have more to offer than just a controversial, scandalous subject. But I do think that it is important to go into this book knowing what it is about, and be prepared to read about difficult subjects. So next up is a book I have never talked about before, and it is The Christmas Pact by Vi Keeland and Penelope Ward. And I listened to it as an audiobook on Audible, and I started around Christmas and then finished just after New Year's. And it is a romance, and it's very similar to a lot of popular romance books at the moment. It's a sort of enemies to lovers story. It's a workplace, and but it's set during Christmas, and it's not a great piece of literature, but like for what it is, it was pretty sweet. It was just the right length, and I didn't feel like it was very different from the popular like romance books at the moment. And considering this was for free on Audible, then I think that you can just as well read this book than many of those like popular books that are going around on BookTok and stuff. So yeah, if you're looking for something Christmassy for next Christmas, then I would recommend this one. So last but not least is Explosive 18 by Janet Evanovich. And as the title suggests, this is book 18 in the Stephanie Plum series. And these books are about Stephanie Plum, who works as a bounty hunter in New Jersey, despite being horrible at her job. And these books are, I would describe them as funny crime novels, and the emphasis really being on funny. The recurring characters and their quirks are much more important to the story than the actual criminal cases in the books. Stephanie also has a thing going with two different men during the series, and their relationships are complicated. They basically take one step forward and then two steps back. So this is basically chick lit with a little bit of crime thrown in there, and they are very, very funny. And I started reading the series back in high school, so I'm very, very fond of them, but I'm perhaps not the best judge of the quality here. So that's it for my first haul video of 2023, and next time there will be only new books, stuff I have never mentioned before. I have started to read a few of the books, but most of them are untouched still. So thank you so much for watching today, and until next time.